Imagine a day when new, more minimally invasive and effective techniques and medical devices can be rolled out to operating rooms around the world faster and more efficiently, and physicians can share their skills and expertise with each other at the touch of a button, no matter where they are located. Our premier sponsor, Avail, has assembled a panel of experts to share how that day has already arrived, enabled by a technology platform that is having a real-life impact on patient care and healthcare systems. I'd like to introduce the moderator for this session, Dina Shaker, partner at Lux Capital. Dina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's great to see you all, see some familiar names among the attendees, and I'm delighted to introduce our excellent and auspicious panel of speakers here. You have access to their full bios, so I will not read all of their accomplishments because that would comprise the duration of our panel. But quickly, by way of introduction, I'll start with Daniel Hawkins, the founder and CEO of Avail Med Systems, which we at Lux Capital are proud and early investors in. Dr. Bill William Nicholson, an interventional cardiologist at Emory and an associate professor of medicine there. And Dr. Cory Calendine, an orthopedic surgeon at the Bone and Joint Institute. We will be discussing the future of procedural telemedicine, and we'll dive directly into some questions with the panelists. We also encourage active participation from all of you that are tuning in. So feel free at any time to throw some questions into the chat. We will also have some dedicated opportunity for Q&A at the end of the last 10 minutes or so of the panel. So with that, allow me to go ahead and get started. And I will turn it over first to Daniel to just briefly introduce his company, Avail, and tell us a little bit about the business as an introductory point. And then we will go into some specific questions and conversations. Daniel?
Great. Thanks very much, Dina. I hope everybody can hear me well. So I started Avail Med Systems in 2017 with the mission of creating a network of technology, hardware, if you will, in operating rooms that accessed live streaming video in the operating room, as well as accessed intraprocedural imaging to enable remote participants to effectively be in the operating room. Those remote participants can be other clinical collaborators in a case, they could be members of industry, they could be fellows, they could be attendings or professors, if you will. The general idea being that in a hardware and software platform, you would be able to enable presence in an operating room without the challenges, logistical challenges, economic burden, and physical burden of physically being in an operating room. The mission of the company is to create a network of these across all clinical specialties and all sites of service to enable collaboration to happen when it's needed versus when it's possible to be there physically.
Thank you so much. One topic we're going to dive into a bit here is not only what the future of the operating room looks like, but also what the future of medical education looks like, both from a medical school perspective, but importantly also from a continuing medical education perspective. So I'll start, Dr. Nicholson, with a question for you from the clinician's perspective. If you could share a bit about, prior to this watershed moment, or unprecedented, or take your term of choice with the pandemic, can you share a bit about how historically the medical community traditionally learned and advanced, from a continuing medical education perspective, with grand rounds and, CME credits and so on? How did you learn those new skills, and what is exciting to you with the current moment and the future of medical education?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's a great question, and it's an interesting kind of story of how things have progressed. I finished my training in 2006, and most of my current practice basically is encompassed by things that weren't really around when I trained. So it's been a progressive educational experience, and It's interesting. I mean, you look at how the fellows now can access everything through the internet and find stuff at their fingertips. And, we used to go hunt through books and libraries to learn that. And, it's sort of analogous to what we've experienced with trying to learn once you've come out of training. Once you've come out of training, it's difficult to get new skill sets. It was difficult to find avenues to do it. And we leveraged heavily on conferences. So you would go to conferences, watch cases, watch lectures on it, and then you'd oftentimes go back, try to figure it out for yourself or collaborate with other colleagues and try to figure things out. And we developed, I'm big into the complex coronary artery revascularization arena, which is complex things like chronic total occlusions, which we don't need to get into, but they're complex cases. And we really sort of, I think, pioneered a lot of the proctoring mentality where we were going out and training and teaching these new techniques. And so we put together, a group of physicians that would go around the different hospitals and sort of stand in the background and watch cases. I would probably flown to 150 hospitals, I would say something like that, to proctor and do the cases. But, it required a day of your time, a day of somebody scheduling the cases, and then hoping that when you got there, the 3 cases actually happened and somebody didn't have a problem with their creatinine or something and got canceled, and, it'd be a wasted trip. And they're hit or miss kind of cases. I mean, sometimes they're the things you want to educate the patient or the physician on. Sometimes they didn't lend itself to that. So it was a very erratic, type of event. It had some pluses. I mean, that got done. But I mean, I think from an efficiency standpoint, both financially for the people investing in the time to do it and our own practices of leaving a practice, leaving home, and going to other places, it just wasn't a model. And, and so I think we were early adopters of the new technology of trying to see if we could leverage some of this virtually. And what Dan's put together, I think, is sort of the, the kind of poster child, this situation of how to do this in a more effective fashion. So we've largely started to change. The pandemic obviously accelerated things dramatically. We were actually in it a little bit ahead of that. So we had some experience with it ahead of time, doing some of the first remote proctoring, but it's really dramatically changed, and it's going to change how continuing education occurs for particularly physicians that are already out in practice. But being in an academic institution like Emory and being around fellows and training, you're going to see how it permeates through that environment as well.
That's great. Thank you. Question for you, Dr. Calendine. In terms of some of these limitations that Dr. Nicholson alluded to, whether it's, getting on a plane and, flying to a certain location, or, acute or urgent conditions, related to imminent surgeries and so on, what, in your opinion, kind of were these limitations prior to your engagement in some of this novel technology? Was it more around supply and demand? Was it around scheduling, or was it something, with the existing technologies? And, why is now the moment, from your perspective, to move forward with a more advanced capability?
Yeah, I think a lot of the things you mentioned, Dina, are the problem, the logistical challenge that were mentioned, trying to get everybody at the same location at the same time, coming from multiple cities. And think about the cost of something like that, right? So it's not only obviously the obvious travel cost or whatever hotel cost, but the loss of revenue and delivery of care where that physician came from. So it's a massive economic burden in a lot of ways to kind of do it the old school way. And there have been many negative things to come with a pandemic like this, but I think we all understand, and we've had our eyes open to virtual engagement, just like we're doing now. But also, how does that translate into the procedural world? I did it quite simply by FaceTime or other probably illegal ways and non-HIPAA compliant ways to try to get that information in situations, Dina, like you were mentioning. We don't always have the ability to plan. Surgery is amazing, and we can really change lives with surgery, but also very unpredictable things can happen during surgery. And don't you want your surgeon to have access to the very best person for that very unique problem? Of course you do. I certainly do for me and my family and for my patients. So the ability to break down the barriers of cost, right? To break down the barriers of schedule, the the opportunity to have the truly best of the best, either with you in your own operating room or being able to reach out and touch them if it's an area of your expertise. I don't know anything about heart catheterization or the vessels of the heart, but I'm so thankful that somebody does. And I want them to be able to call, Dr. Nicholson and not suffer from the limitations of the geographic location that I'm at that moment. My space is robotics, right? So we're not at the point where the robot is doing the procedure for you. It's a new technology. So rolling out this new technology, we're learning a lot. How do we innovate better and faster? And how do we deliver these very powerful tools into surgeons and speed up their education? That I think is just a massive opportunity. And now we know how to do it.
It's truly remarkable. I'll interject with a quick personal story as moderator. I come from a family of physicians, and my grandfather was a professor and practicing physician in Iraq, in the 40s and 50s. And I often think, if he were alive today, how would he think about the access, that he would have in Iraq to some of the top surgeons here in the US. So it's really amazing. Daniel, you have an incredibly impressive career prior to starting this company. I'd love if you could share a little bit more about your own story and how this came to be, well in advance of any sort of hint of a pandemic, the problem that you decided to take on.
Happy to. Dina, my career started 26 years ago in medtech, and I started in angioplasty, and just prior to Avail, my last company was angioplasty. But I started with large organizations and quickly discovered that I'm more attuned to earlier stage, and found my way to being the first non-technical person at Intuitive Surgical. So Cory and I have a similar kinship to robotics in that manner. And from there, kind of learned, if you will, what disruption means, what it means to challenge what is the status quo for the better. A physician entrepreneur by the name of Frederick Mull is the one who showed me, if you will, the pathway towards that. I started going even earlier stage and was involved in a couple of companies in the gastric space, in the gastric bypass space, and then one in ENT that both either went public or were acquired. And then, frankly, along the way, started inventing some of my own things. Was part of a company, or part of a group that started an insulin delivery company that was acquired by J&J. And then I came up with this harebrained idea of mashing up lithotripsy and angioplasty, and started a company called Shockwave Medical. And thankfully, I'm proud and happy to say that Bill's a customer of Shockwave. But one of the things I noticed along the way, and I think, Dina, this is where you were headed, is what's a common thread within all of that? What I discovered is, from an industry perspective, it's extraordinarily challenging to disseminate new technologies and techniques. You either need to be in the room or convince a physician to do the things that Bill and Cory have just mentioned, to leave their practice and go into a room on your behalf. It's an enormous drain of resources, and probably more significant than anything, the threshold to be able to do those things limits their use. As a practical matter, expertise is needed in an operating room far more times than it's actually available. One of the most telling things that we learned in a survey of a number of our key opinion leader users of the Avail technology, it was an anonymous survey on purpose because we wanted to learn, if you will, the real story. What we heard to the one, with slightly different language from one to the next, is even though the key opinion leader, who by definition is at the peak of their career, their comments centered around, I'm not alone in the operating room. With this type of a technology, I now have access to my colleagues, my practice colleagues within my group. I have access to colleagues I went to med school with. I have access to experts across the country, because really, at the touch of a button, for 5, 7 minutes, 20 minutes, half hour, whatever's necessary, a colleague can chime in and then go back to the rest of their day. The reason why I started this company was to enable that type of collaboration, with a foundational goal to actually be in every clinical specialty, in procedure rooms in sites of service across the country and ultimately across the globe to enable that collaboration to happen, again, when it's needed versus when it's otherwise physically possible. So that's really what led to it. It's kind of as simple as that. And from a disruption perspective, I look at the status quo and prior to 2017 when I started the company, and was just unsatisfied. I was unsatisfied that this is the best with today's technology that could be done. So really, that's really what was the impetus. And really, I'm obviously thrilled with where we are today. I wish it didn't take a pandemic, to say the least. I would prefer slower growth and no pandemic. That goes without saying. Having said that, I think what the pandemic did is put a spotlight on the notion that remote is not only possible for healthcare, it's enabling. And we're seeing the signs of that right now.
Thank you. Very well said, Daniel. I think that's a great segue to you, Dr. Nicholson, in terms of the evolution of the relationship here. You talked a bit about some of the, the headwinds, and also we know about some of these tailwinds. But can you share a bit more into the story of how you came to bring Avail to your health system and what that process was like?
Yeah, I can. I mean, I think, Dan's obviously a pioneering brain in this field with the different things that he's been involved with. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. And, we've had a chance to meet and, sort of outline his vision of this network technology, sort of a collaboration that was available through what he was laying out. And it just resonated. I mean, it makes perfect sense. I mean, the beautiful thing about where I think it fits into our situation is maybe the proctoring aspect of being able to do it that way, but the ability to leverage help or support when you need it at your fingertips. It's not a pre-planned case. It's not a preconceived thing that you need a televised network to do it or something like that. It's the kind of thing that if you hit a point in a case where even if you're pretty certain what you're doing, but you want to get a second thought from somebody, you value their opinion, it's a quick press of a button and you dial them up on their computer, their iPad, they're right there in the room with you, and it makes sense. And, we were doing much what Cory was describing, a lot of FaceTime, a lot of things, people trying to hold an iPhone up to a monitor to show us what they were looking at and see if we could try to piece it together. But it just, was so rudimentary, and this seemed so obvious. And then when the pandemic, so we started a little bit before the pandemic and did some remote proctoring cases and things like that, particularly going back to my own institution where we had Avail and I'd be out proctoring another hospital. And I remember, sitting at the other hospital where I'm proctoring my friends back at my own institution through Avail. So, you kind of could be in multiple places at one time. When the pandemic hit, I mean, there's clearly, we did because we were obviously taking care of a lot of heart attacks during the time. So we worked all through the pandemic period. So we didn't, kind of shelter. We were in there, but we platooned a bit, so that we didn't have all the interventional cardiologists get COVID at the same time and not be able to take care of heart attacks. So we were doing a week on and then a week off to make sure people weren't getting infected. But, people have different skill sets, as Cory and Dan can attest to, in their own fields, they're subspecialists. And so there's things that maybe I was very comfortable with doing that maybe a colleague wasn't, but I'm not in there now. And so we used the Avail during those times to sort of stand there and do the case with your colleague. And remember one of the last cases I did in my own institution was a transcatheter aortic valve replacement from the patient's axillary artery. The guy hadn't done it before, and I walked him through the whole case. And so, you have the ability to be there the same way that you would if you were standing in the room effectively. And particularly in the proctoring arena where we can't touch anything anyway, you really aren't limited as to what you can provide. And then it's just sort of snowballed from there. I mean, there's so many obvious kind of connectivity opportunities, particularly with me being at a large academic institution. We get a lot of referrals in for cases that people can't necessarily do comfortably at their own institution, but there's a reverse, connection this way. So we allow them to basically view in what we're doing. So we do their complex case and they can watch remotely from an iPad and effectively be in the cath lab with us and see how we're doing the case. And so they continue their education, continue to develop their skill sets to continue to broaden the number of people out there that can positively affect patient outcomes in the future.
That's great. Thank you. Dr. Calendine, it's an interesting time for humanity and certainly for, all professions as there is a move toward a hybrid model or fully remote. And when it comes to the patient-provider relationship, what does that sort of look like? But there's actually, it seems, been a little discussion around specifically the sort of notion of procedural telemedicine, which is obviously what we are talking about today. So I would love to get your perspective, or maybe even your prospective in terms of what permanent changes you think will come into practice, at least from your perspective, with procedural telemedicine, and specifically around this idea of remote work and remote education.
Well, I think that's spot on. I think the reality is there will be permanent change, and what's going to stay around? What's going to stay around is what's simple, right? So it's got to be simple. It's got to be cost effective, right? So we can't just balloon cost, and it's got to be better. And what you heard Bill really say, what's the old adage is if you hear hooves, it's probably a horse. Yeah, but sometimes it's a zebra. And when you're talking about surgery and you have a zebra, I want Bill on the line. And so the things that are going to stay are the things that we can roll out in a thoughtful way that truly are better. And that, listen, the type of information we were exchanging over other networks, inferior to like Avail is presenting to us, weren't giving us the full picture. I mean, I think I've got a better picture remotely with Avail than I do with my own eyes somehow. I don't know how that works, but the ability to zoom in and be directly present is so important. So it's not just, it's a nice camera. It's the ability to interact that's so important. It's the connections that we make that are not going to go away. And so the things that I think are permanently changed, just to be honest, I think are everything, for procedural telemedicine. Bill alluded to it, but just to be clear, when I go in and train people on robotics, I'm not licensed in that state, for example. I mean, I can't directly be doing the case. And to be fair, the surgeon performing the case is a certified orthopedic surgeon, but it's the nuances of the zebra that we can't possibly predict. And so we build out a network, not only to force innovation like we talk about, and trust me, in the robotic space, I'm into that side because I think we can do better for each and every patient, but the ability to adapt and evolve and use the innovations better and everything be faster. You mentioned the beauty of your family and the lineage of medicine. There are no international borders for us anymore. There's no state to state borders for us. It really is opening education in a very real way. So I think there'll be a lot of permanent change, and I think ultimately, I think Dan will probably do well. I think he's got a pretty good idea, but ultimately it's the patient that's going to do well and succeed. It's an incredible story.
That's fantastic. I love that quote. I just had to write it down here. What's going to change with procedural telemedicine? It's everything. I think that is spot on, and we'll be seeing perhaps some more zebras to come there. In terms of the sort of experience within your institutions and your health systems, do you all, and this is a question for both of you and for you as well, Daniel, in terms of the types of, whether it's indications or types of procedures or types of surgeries that perhaps initially might lend themselves more, or do you think this is a technology that is widely applicable across the board in any sort of surgical intervention? Let's start with you, Dr. Calendine.
Yeah, I mean, for me, obviously, the innovation piece, which we've hit a lot on, if it's new, obviously there's some education around that. But I think you're right to slow us down just a little bit and say, if there's great benefit for innovation, what about all the rest of the cases? And I really think that's what I think Daniel's trying to accomplish. We're trying to set these systems in places to where we have connection. right? We have connection immediately, and Zoom taught us that, right? We deliver happiness, right? Well, maybe what procedural telemedicine is we deliver excellence, right, on every case. Like I don't have an off case, right? They're all somebody's mom, right, or what have you. So I think it's applicable for innovation, but I think it's a great point. And sorry to step in first, but I think it's a great point that really all cases can benefit.
I love the what you just mentioned about it's somebody's mom, and that's just a piece of the conversation that I want to highlight and get your perspective on as well, Dr. Nicholson, which is we've talked a lot about the medical education, the sort of clinical experience, and the provider's perspective. But I would love to hear kind of your insights on what this means ultimately for the patient and for the patient's family. Of course, we hope better outcomes, but perhaps you can share some more insights on that.
Yeah, I think it's the heart of everything that we're talking about, and I think you want, it's a funny world in medicine. Like, you'd think being a doctor that I know the best doctors to send my family to and so forth. And I mean, the fact of the matter is we don't, I don't know who's really, really good in other specialties. And like, I'd love to know that I had Cory taking care of my family member, but you don't know that you do. And I think part of the limitation is physicians traditionally always wanted to look like they knew what they were doing, and were always afraid to let down their guard. And it's largely because there was nobody to turn to, because you were kind of the final person in the room, and there was nobody there to ask, what else would you do here? This eliminates that. So I mean, I think you take a lot of the insecurities out of play. I think you have a lot of the ability for physicians to leverage support, and at their heart, physicians, I believe, wholeheartedly always want the best for their patients. And I think if you had opportunities for them to leverage added support during a case or input, I think that people will take advantage of that repeatedly. And I think that's really where I think when you start talking about you want your family member to get the best, and you don't know that that's always where they're at, but at least now they have the opportunity to get the support of the input to get the best outcome for your family member.
It's fantastic. Let's turn to a question from one of the participants here. And this is a question for Cory and Bill. Do you plan to use the Avail telemedicine technology before you start the case, or is this something that you prefer to have on standby in anticipation of a complex case? Eric McClung here is trying to figure out how these are scheduled within a facility that might have cath labs and ORs, for example.
I'll answer that quickly, Cory, but just from our perspective, I think we have both. I mean, so we have cases that we're clearly planning to televise, that are for educational purposes, that we're going to have 5, 10, 15 viewers. And, we just did a case that was viewed by thousands of viewers around the world for a CTO done by Avail. And so you have cases like that. The nice thing is the easy kind of plug and play, sort of quick setup and mobile quality to the units. So it's the kind of thing that if you're in the middle of the case and you unexpectedly think you need support or you want to leverage that kind of ability, the beauty and I think what makes this distinguish it from other potential televising modalities or platforms is the fact that you can wheel it into any room you're in. You don't have to have the room pre-wired for it, and you can wheel it in anytime you need it. So if I'm working in one room and I say, well, gee whiz, I'd really like to see what my colleague in Seattle thinks of this, and if I'm not in the right room with a hardwired system, I can't do that. With this, you wheel the machine into the room you want, you extend the camera arm, plug in the inputs that you want, and press a button on the screen and dial up the iPad. And so you have both capabilities. You have pre-planned capabilities, and I think you have the ability to deal with the spontaneity of the unknown as it comes up.
Well, yeah, and I would just add to that, really what we're doing is, increasing our connections, right? So pretty soon the hardware is going to be there, and like Bill mentioned, the hardware is mobile. But as we're creating these connections, right, in medicine, we're really stronger, knowing who to call and how to schedule all that. But this morning I was on a case, just a very straightforward knee scope, and several people. I mean, some patients were on there, and physical therapists, and those kind of things. So I think that again, it can be used in that setting. But with regard to excellence in patient care, I think the real power is going to come, when you have it on demand like that. It's a powerful tool.
Absolutely. I want to invite any other participants who might have questions for our panelists, echoing Steve's call here for additional questions. We have a few more minutes here and can entertain any additional questions. And if not, I can continue as I could jam about the future of virtual care any day of the week. So I will kick it back to you, Daniel, and get a sense for what's next. Here we are. Hopefully, certainly healthcare practitioners are vaccinated. We're thinking and starting to return to normalcy. We were just chatting backstage about first in-person meetings. Tell us a little bit about what's next for you with Avail.
Yeah, happy to. Dina, if I could actually, I hate to make this feel a little bit like a debate, but I want to go back to answer a comment on the earlier question, if I could, for a half second. So I think Eric brings up a great question. I know it feels a little bit like I'm answering the question I want to answer, right? So, both Bill and Cory commented on something I think is really, really important here, and that is when the network is in its richness state, if you will, where within a clinical specialty, the platform has physical location in lots of places, and we're building that very aggressively right now with health systems and with ASC networks and the like. But in that state, one of the most important elements is exactly what they both alluded to. I need to grab somebody's opinion for 10 minutes. We designed the system so that it is on wheels. It takes just a few minutes to set up. And if you think you might need somebody, then you might tell them in advance, and they would make themselves available such that when you turn that console on, their name shows up, and it shows up in a color-coded manner to tell you they're available right that minute. We also have a platform built in a manner where a selection of folks can indicate that they are available, and you can choose from a selection of those people to be available at that particular moment. Really what we're trying to do is lower that threshold, right? So if Bill has colleagues or Cory has colleagues across the country and they have interest in a 10-minute kind of quick look, hey, they might call or they might not. But if Bill and Cory know that, then they're available, and that can be that on the spot. And that's how we really designed the system. Going forward, Dina, what we're really looking to do, of course, is extend that network. We want to create educational opportunities that we've been talking about one-to-one educational opportunities. Very shortly, we're going to have one-to-many educational opportunities. We see opportunities for instead of clinical specialties having to wait till the annual meeting to see live cases, we see opportunities to create master's classes, if you will, a middle of the week or weekend on demand almost, capabilities where key opinion leaders in one specialty or another can get together panel style like you see at the annual meetings, but do so for a particular special presentation of case, the kind you might see at the annual meeting, but see it in a regular fashion and ideally for CME credits and the like. But it allows that kind of an opportunity without having to travel for it, and most importantly, without having to wait for it. Right. So if there's a new technology that gets introduced 3 weeks after the annual meeting, when are you supposed to see that? You got to wait till next year? No, we want to create an opportunity where you'd be able to do that very acutely thereafter, if you will. I think there's future opportunities in being able to create really interesting libraries. I think there are artificial intelligence opportunities that can be had. I should say probably the most important element of this, once a network is sufficiently established, is that incidental collaboration and creating those connections, if you will. Because again, as stated a little bit earlier, I said something most directly, and I think each of Bill and Cory has said this, there's no one physician that knows everything. And I think the spirit of medicine, even in the terminology of the practice of medicine, means we're always getting better. There's always education to be had and education to be delivered. And really the mission of what we're doing is to be able to make that a fluid activity on a communications platform that is the exact same regardless of where you are and where you're trying to reach to. So really the future for Avail is building that network domestically and globally, and becoming the operating system of kind of remote procedure access, if you will.
Great, thank you so much. I think we have time for maybe one more question. I'm going to combine Eric and Jake's questions here, which is, around the experience with the software. So, do you need to train consultants to use it? And are these devices or systems replacing the medical device reps in the OR, or does there still need to be a physical presence? Any anecdotes that you might be able to share would be helpful.
I'm going to let Bill take the first part about interfacing. Most of the work I've done with Avail is on the presentation platform, so I've had some Avail support here. The keypad's very straightforward, but Avail's been great to start that process. But I'll let Bill talk about it on a more day-to-day. But I do want to address that issue of medical device. You know, in my world, sometimes we do get complicated cases like distal femoral replacements. So I'm taking out large sections of a person's thigh and reconstructing it. Look, these are done at very limited counts, anywhere, and there are reps that support those specific cases. Now it takes me days to line up all the equipment I need, as well as that particular rep that's a specialist for those instruments. Imagine if, hey, yes, they still have to get me the instruments, but I have the best of the best to do a distal femoral replacement rep that can just drop in on me. He's just commenting, telling me stuff. Again, he's not physically touching the patient or the instruments. He's just helping me along with the nuances of that rare procedure. I think medical device representation can be totally rethought with this type of platform.
Yeah, I would echo that what Cory's saying from a support standpoint. I mean, it's like it or not, it's integral to what we do. These device reps, they're there with multiple purposes, but some of it's, financial and market share, but a lot of it's expertise and they have a ton of value that they bring to the cases. And even as the pandemic hopefully continues to calm down, the desire to have 6 people in the operating room that maybe don't have to be there is going to be something less desirable for who knows what the next situation is going to be. And so this is an opportunity, and add to that there's heterogeneity amongst physicians. There's certainly heterogeneity amongst reps, and so you're not stuck with your local rep. You're stuck with whoever you want, whoever the best is, and you don't need to have them there. And so you've got an opportunity to leverage that. And I think the question about having the consultants trained, it's a two kind of image strategy with that. So if I'm televising, there's really not much, that the person that wants to receive it has to do. So like if it's a referral that wants to watch me do the case, it's very simple. There's an easy download of software onto an iPad or to a computer, and they can log in and watch, and there's not much to it. If you actually have the Avail system at your institution, there's a little bit of support with learning how to use it, but it's, I'm 48 years old. I'm starting to realize that I'm becoming older as my medical students are half my age, but for them, to see what it takes to get facile with this and be able to hook it up is like a walk in the park for them. I mean, it's not a real complex system that needs a lot of time. And we've got a couple super users that are facile with it, but the fact of the matter is it's pretty simple. If you can learn how to plug your computer in, you're going to be able to learn how to do this in pretty short order.
Dina, if I could comment for a quick second on the last one. One of the things that I think is really important to understand here is across specialties, medical device reps really add an extraordinary amount of clinical value to procedures. And, obviously heterogeneity, as we described, in terms of need as well as in terms of skill from the reps. But a technology like this enables that rep to be able to support their physician, even if they happen to be across town or across their territory or somewhere else entirely. Really, this is in an industry utilization embodiment. The capabilities really enables clinical expertise from a rep to be there whenever it's needed. And of course, if you're bringing in instruments, that's a totally different deal, right? Cory, I'm sure lots of reps bring in instruments for you, right? So in orthopedics, there's some challenges there. A lot different when the instruments are on site or could otherwise be delivered. But really, the intent is to enable that kind of capability to be really there when the physician needs it.
I think that's a great note to end on, Daniel. Thank you and Dr. Calendine and Dr. Nicholson for sharing your thoughts today. As somebody who invests in the future of health tech, I'm feeling very optimistic and excited and hopeful about the way that you'll be not only improving medical education, but ultimately patient outcomes. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Dina. You were a fantastic moderator, and what a great panel. Thank you all for your participation today. And to our audience, thank you for the great questions.